I had taken the nursing job in rural Malaysia to get away from the noise and chaos of Kuala Lumpur. The small, jungle-surrounded village seemed peaceful, almost idyllic, with its quiet nights and friendly people. The clinic I was assigned to was little more than a small, two-room shack, but the villagers were grateful for any help they could get. I wanted to make a difference. On my first day, I met Amina, the village's midwife. She was an older woman, with deep lines etched into her face, but her eyes were sharp, watchful. She took me under her wing immediately, guiding me through the traditions and customs of the village. "The jungle is alive," she told me as we sat outside the clinic one evening, the air heavy with the scent of frangipani. "It watches, it remembers. And there are things here that you must respect, or they will come for you." I had smiled politely, thinking she was referring to superstitions. But Amina's gaze had grown serious. "Especially be careful of the Penanggalan," she whispered. "You know her by the smell of vinegar and the rustling of wings. If you hear that, pray." I had laughed it off at the time. The Penanggalan was something from horror stories, a boogeyman to frighten children. I didn't believe in monsters. But belief doesn't always protect you from the things that hunt in the dark. 2 weeks later, the nightmare began. It was a hot, suffocating night, and the jungle buzzed with the hum of insects. I had just finished a long shift at the clinic, where a young mother had gone into early labor. She and her baby were fine, but I was exhausted, my scrubs soaked with sweat. The village was silent as I walked back to the small guest house where I was staying. I passed under the banyan trees, their roots twisting like old fingers through the earth. The moon was bright, casting pale shadows over the path. The village felt safe, familiar. Then I smelled it, vinegar. Sharp, sour, and out of place. I stopped, my pulse quickening. A chill crawled up my spine. "It's nothing," I told myself. Maybe someone was pickling vegetables. But the smell grew stronger, more acrid, stinging my nostrils. And then, I heard it, a faint rustling, like wings beating against the night air. My heart hammered in my chest. Amina's warning echoed in my mind, but I forced myself to keep walking, my pace quickening. "You're being ridiculous," I thought. "It's just a story." But the rustling followed me, growing louder. I glanced over my shoulder, and the shadows seemed to shift, twisting in the moonlight. The jungle felt closer, the darkness pressing in. I broke into a run, my footsteps pounding on the dirt path. I burst into the guest house, slamming the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The silence inside was deafening. I locked the door and checked the windows, making sure every latch was secure. I was just being paranoid. There was no such thing as a Penanggalan. Right. I was lying in bed, tossing and turning, when I heard it. A faint, wet squelching sound, like something dragging along the ground. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound came again, louder, and then a soft, scratchy rustling, like wings brushing against the walls. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to get up. My hands shook as I reached for my flashlight, and I crept to the window. The smell of vinegar was overpowering now, seeping into the room like a suffocating fog. Slowly, I peeked out through the wooden slats, and my stomach lurched. Something was floating in the moonlit courtyard. A head, a woman's head, with long, black hair whipping around in the air. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, her mouth twisted into a hungry grin. But that wasn't the worst part. Her neck had torn away from her body, trailing glistening, wet organs that pulsed and writhed as they dangled below her. A Penanggalan. The creature's eyes snapped to the window, locking onto mine, and her grin widened. She lunged forward, her organs slapping wetly against the wooden walls, and I stumbled back, biting down a scream. My flashlight fell from my hands, clattering to the floor. The rustling grew louder, more frantic. The windowpane rattled as the creature slammed into it, and I could see her face peering in, her mouth stretching open to reveal rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "Let me in," she hissed, her voice a wet, gurgling whisper. "I can smell the blood." I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a small mirror from the bedside table, and clutched it like a shield, my heart pounding. My mind raced, trying to remember anything Amina had told me about protecting oneself from the Penanggalan. I remembered hearing something about mirrors and how they could repel evil spirits, but I didn't know if it would work. The creature's organs scraped against the wooden walls, leaving trails of blood and slime. She bared her teeth, her eyes gleaming with hunger. "Go away," I shouted, holding the mirror up to the window. The Penanggalan screeched, recoiling from her own reflection, her face contorting in rage. The smell of vinegar intensified, and she thrashed, her hair whipping around her like living tendrils. With a final, ear-piercing wail, she shot away from the window, disappearing into the night with a rustle of wings. I fell to my knees, the mirror slipping from my hands. My body was shaking, drenched in cold sweat. The room smelled like vinegar and rot, and I could still hear the echo of her laughter, fading into the jungle. The next morning, I stumbled into the clinic, my eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Amina was already there, preparing herbs and bandages. She looked up when I walked in, and her gaze sharpened. "You saw her," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my throat dry. "How do we stop her?" I whispered. Amina's expression was grave. The Penanggalan only hunts at night. During the day, she appears as a normal woman, her organs back inside her body. We must find her true form and burn it. "How?" I asked, desperation clawing at my voice. Amina handed me a bundle of dried herbs. "These will reveal her. We must sprinkle them around the village and watch who reacts. The Penanggalan cannot hide from the scent." That afternoon, we walked through the village, scattering the herbs at doorways and corners. The villagers watched us with wary eyes, whispering and crossing themselves. My hands were still trembling, but I forced myself to be brave. We reached the small market square when a young woman appeared, carrying a basket of fruit. I recognized her, Zulaika, one of the most beautiful women in the village. She often helped new mothers, visiting them with gifts and blessings. As we scattered the herbs, she suddenly stumbled, clutching her stomach. Her face twisted in pain, and her eyes darted around, wild with fear. Amina's eyes narrowed. "It's her." Zulaika dropped the basket, her eyes flashing with fury. "How dare you?" she hissed, but her voice was different now, guttural, inhuman. "Get back!" Amina shouted. Zulaika let out a bone-chilling scream, and for a moment, her human form flickered. Her neck bulged, and I saw the grotesque, pulsating organs straining to break free. The villagers screamed, backing away in terror. Amina shoved a torch into my hands. "Now, Callum." I didn't think, I just acted. I lit the torch and hurled it at Zulaika. The flames caught her dress, and she screeched, her body writhing as fire engulfed her. Her skin split, revealing the monstrous, glistening organs beneath, and the air filled with the stench of burning flesh and vinegar. The Penanggalan thrashed, her cries echoing through the village, until she collapsed into a smoldering, blackened heap. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, and then, silence. Amina turned to me, her face lined with relief. It is done. I collapsed to the ground, the adrenaline draining from my body. We had won, but the horror of that night would never leave me. The jungle had taken its price, and the memory of the Penanggalan would haunt me forever.